Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and I assure you the people who work in this town right behind me, a lot of them, especially the Democrats, they don't want you to be thinking about President Joe Biden's budget. They're throwing a lot of other magical things to distract you out there, but the budget tells you exactly what your priorities are, and Republicans are going through this budget with a fine-tooth comb to tell you exactly what's wrong with the Biden administration and how their priorities are completely off kilter, starting with how much they want to take out of your pocket. Joining us right now is Representative Kevin Hern. He's the chairman of the Republican Study Committee and also on the Budget Committee. In fact, are you the chair of the Budget Committee, or are you just sort of...
I did that for 2 years, but yeah, it was quite an experience producing on two budgets for the last 2 years.
You know your way around a federal budget. And boy, this one, I'm told by the president and all of the trusted voices on CNN and ABC News that he didn't raise taxes on anyone except the super wealthy congressman.
Well, it's just not true. You know, here's the thing with his budget. All roads lead to more debt. And that's very problematic since China is buying our debt as fast as they can as well. But, you know, the problem for the president is he says he's going to cut the deficit, but it's only if he gets the growth that he anticipates. And his policies are not pro-growth.
Right.
When you're going out and destroying the energy industry, when you have a border crisis that we have and people are dying and we're dealing with that, and then when you see the inflation being persistent and inflation continuing to be something that's an inhibitor to growth, and then we see interest rates causing a squeeze on our long-term treasuries, which is ultimately the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back on our three banks that we saw collapse the last 2 weeks. These are all things that are very problematic to this president's budget being much of a success. So he's got a lot of explaining to do. It's $17 trillion in new debt, a place we don't need to go, and nobody believes that it's going to cut any deficit.
Yeah, and listen, let's say some would tell you that we're still in a recession right now where GDP is barely showing a heartbeat, and yet I saw an analysis from the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation that said that this would actually shrink the GDP by about 1.9%. I didn't realize our economy was at a place where it could take that sort of hit.
Well, the problem for the president is he forgets what really motivates a free economy, a free market, and that's to go out and believe that you can work hard and you can create jobs and not be penalized for that. And that's what this president wants to do. He's trying to create a tax that by all outside analysts say that it violates the Constitution. He's wanting to tax wealth. The 16th Amendment doesn't allow you to do that. It allows you to tax income. The president's trying to make up taxation that is just, it's insane. He wants to tax more, spend more, which is going to continue to drive the deficits and debt to an all-time high. We just had the CBO director, Philip Swagel, do 3 different presentations to us in RSC. Also, Speaker McCarthy had, in a bipartisan way, had him come in to speak to some 300 Democrats and Republicans just a week ago to talk about why we all need to work together to stop the crazy spending and start working on pro-growth legislation and really sit down in a bipartisan way to talk about our promises that we've made to our seniors and to our veterans. Because if we don't, in just some 20 years, our debts are going to be, $80-90 trillion.
Yeah.
Far cry from where we're at now with 31 trillion.
Yeah, and also, by the way, setting aside the tax question and the slow growth policies that we see, if not negative growth policies that we see in this budget, as I mentioned, this also is a blueprint for what your priorities are and what you care most about. I learned from your colleagues in their hearing on the border yesterday, literally on our border, about border control that is porous with millions crossing the border illegally, that over the course of these 10 years, the investment, the spending in our border control will actually be going down. And whatever money that might be increased in certain portions of border safety, sir, will be spent on processing people, care and feeding of the people you're allowing to cross illegally.
Well, to your point, I just issued a letter, actually went out last night, talking about the priorities on the border. And we've got to stop enticing people coming from all over the world. It's not just Mexico, it's from all over the world seeking asylum and then just absolutely collapsing our entire system of legal system of jurisdictions. They're across the southern border just being inundated by people coming from all over the world because they don't clearly understand that this president doesn't want you to come here. And so he's putting out these policies or just basically what he's not saying, and people are coming from everywhere. And this is what President Trump learned, is that if we stop, you can't build a border wall immediately. You can't put a border patrol person every 10 feet. But if you stop the enticement, stop the idea that if you come here, you're going to automatically be caught and released, then you can slow down illegal immigration coming across the southern border. And this president needs to do the same thing.
One looming problem here, though, as the House Republicans enter regular order and actually, imagine that, have budget committee hearings and work through the process of discussing how we're going to run the government and fund the government. There is a deadline approaching, and that's the debt ceiling problem. I know the Republican Study Committee, of which you're the chairman, you've put forward a proposal in terms of how to properly calculate the debt ratio. Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so when you look at what's going on, in fact, just released yesterday a debt ceiling, a debt limit playbook, talking about sort of putting aside the fact that, yes, we have negotiated. This president would like to think you negotiate on debt limit. We always have. In fact, the biggest debt cuts, if you will, deficit cuts have come from debt limit discussions over the last 40 years now, since 1985. We can think about Graham-Rudman and the sequestration. All of these cuts have come in the discussion of a debt limit. So it has been historical in our discussions. The second thing is when you look at this, you ought to be a segue of what you discussed to get your debt limit increased, ought to be a segue into your budget, because those same types of cutting of the spending, the crazy spending that we've seen, just a $185 billion increase since just October with the omnibus, you can start rolling those back, and you can start getting to a place where you're starting to bend the curve. Every person, you can think of this as when you go buy your house, they look at your income to what the debt's going to be, and it's some percentage, 20%. Well, much like what we do right now, when everybody was talking about Ronald Reagan back in the 80s, the debt to GDP was about 40%. Today, it's about 129%.
Oof.
So that means for every dollar we take in, we're spending about $1.29. Everybody in America nobody has to have an economics degree or a finance degree to understand you can't keep doing that. And you cannot grow your way out of that, which is what Philip Swagel, the CBO director, said last week. You have got to cut spending.
You would be rejected for that mortgage application if you had the income to debt ratio that our government currently has. And yet they keep looking at it, sir, as this fixed number that they just keep raising about. We can do the fixed number. It's all about the percentage of debt to what money you're bringing in, isn't it?
It is. And so we have to start bending the cost curve and get on a trajectory where our deficits are being less and less of our GDP every year. I mean, we're going to have to start doing this, and that's what RSC budget does. It moves that. It did last year. It did the year before that. It started bending that cost curve. And here's the fact. The fact is, 2 years ago, it was easier to do that than it was last year. Today, right now, will be easier to do than tomorrow. And yet this president and many of my colleagues across Congress, Republicans and Democrats, are nervous about looking at a balanced budget in 10 years. Yeah. But think about 10-year balanced budget. That means we have to have what many in America would think austerity measures to get to a balanced budget, and do that time and time again, 10 years, 5 congressional cycles.
Yeah.
We have to do it.
It's hard to think that only 20 years ago in the mid-90s, both Republicans with Newt Gingrich and Democrats with Bill Clinton, they were vying for the ability to say, yes, I balanced the budget, because you could win an election by saying you balanced the budget. We got to bring that back again. Thank you, Congressman Kevin Hern. We'll be back. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.